The Zereth arrived in a flash of light. At first, their presence seemed almost like a blessing. Their ships, sleek and elegant, arrived in Earth's orbit without warning. For weeks, they'd broadcast peaceful signals, offering advanced technology and knowledge, promising to help heal the planet's most pressing issues: war, climate change, and famine. The world's leaders, desperate for any solution, welcomed them with open arms. But the facade of peace quickly crumbled. It started with the sudden disappearance of several key leaders who had been involved in the Zereth negotiations. The media, controlled by the alien visitors, quickly shut down any investigation, and rumors of a covert agenda spread across the world. As tensions began to rise, a global summit was called, but the Zereth were already several steps ahead. In a swift, coordinated attack, the Zereth unleashed a devastating weapon upon Earth. The skies above the major cities flickered with deadly light as their orbital platforms fired devastating energy beams that reduced buildings to rubble. New York, Paris, Beijing, the iconic cities of Earth fell first. The planet's defenses, outdated and scattered, were no match for the Zereth's overwhelming power. A desperate resistance rose in the shadows. Military units, local militias, and freedom fighters gathered to protect what remained of their cities. Earth's finest minds worked tirelessly to build counterweapons, but all efforts were futile. The Zereth's technology was so advanced that they neutralized humanity's strongest counters with little effort. Satellites were destroyed, communication lines severed, and all attempts to organize a coordinated defense were shattered. Yet even in the darkest hours, humanity's spirit never faltered. Underground bunkers became the last refuge for survivors. The global resistance had fractured but not broken. It was then that the Zereth revealed their true nature. The grand offer of peace had always been a lie, a ruse to soften humanity up for their true objective: the complete subjugation of Earth. As Earth's population descended into chaos, the survivors' hope shifted from defeating the invaders to escaping them. The Zereth's final blow came in the form of a cataclysmic energy wave, devastating Earth's magnetic field and sending the planet spiraling toward irreversible decay. Humanity was left with no choice but to abandon their home. The once thriving cities, the towering monuments to human achievement, were reduced to ruins. Earth's future was no longer theirs to control. The last ships, a fleet of makeshift craft built in secret by the few remaining scientists and engineers, began their desperate flight from the planet's dying atmosphere. Some ships carried families, others carried military personnel, and a few held critical scientific data and technologies that could allow humanity to rebuild. But even in their exodus, Earth's people were pursued. As their vessels jumped into the unknown, the final message humanity would receive from Earth was a broadcast that echoed across space: "We are not defeated. We will rebuild. We are humanity." The survivors flowed into the cold, indifferent stars. But a fire had been kindled. Earth may have fallen, but humanity's fight had just begun. The fleet of ships that had escaped Earth drifted through the dark abyss of space, a ragged group of survivors in a galaxy that seemed vast and uncaring. Some ships had been hastily constructed, their designs far from perfect, while others were relics of Earth's military, retrofitted for civilian use. Together, they formed a fragile convoy of humanity's last hope, desperately charting courses through unknown territories. The survivors had no time for mourning. The journey had become one of survival. The escape from Earth was a blur of panic and confusion, but now the full weight of the exodus began to settle. The ships drifted aimlessly, unsure of where they were heading, but always pushed forward by the need for a future, any future. The first few months were the hardest. The convoy moved between star systems, exploring countless barren worlds, some already colonized by other alien species, others completely inhospitable. The survivors were faced with the grim reality that humanity was alone in the universe, unwanted by every species they encountered. The Zereth, relentless in their pursuit, had deployed hunting fleets to track down the exiles and destroy them. Every time a human ship encountered a strange vessel, fear gripped the hearts of the survivors. Would this be the moment when they were found? Tensions flared as resources dwindled. Fuel was rationed, and food supplies became critical. Some colonies within the fleet began to splinter, with arguments and disputes breaking out over leadership, food distribution, and the direction they should take. With no clear destination and only the stars as their guide, the once unified group was on the brink of collapse. Yet, through it all, the human spirit endured. Engineers, scientists, and soldiers worked tirelessly to keep the fleet moving. Humanity's ingenuity was its greatest weapon. Using the limited resources available, they invented makeshift solutions to their technological problems, designed new life support systems, and repurposed old weapons into defenses. The survival of the fleet relied on unity, a bond forged in the face of extinction. Then, a breakthrough came when a scout ship, sent on a reconnaissance mission, discovered an uncharted solar system. At its heart was a small habitable planet, one of the few humanity had encountered since fleeing Earth. It was a paradise compared to the barren wastelands they had seen, with breathable air, fertile soil, and oceans that seemed to shimmer under a gentle sun. A new hope flickered in the hearts of the survivors, as the planet was deemed their best chance for survival. But as the human ships made their approach, a chilling realization dawned. They were not alone. The planet, though seemingly perfect, was already inhabited. The native species, a fierce and highly territorial race, saw the humans as intruders. They were an ancient species, proud of their isolation and unwilling to share their home. The survivors were faced with a bitter choice: risk violent confrontation with an alien species for the sake of survival, or leave and continue the journey through a hostile and unknown galaxy. The decision was made in the heat of the moment. The human leaders had no illusions of victory against the native species, but there was no other choice. Negotiations were tried, but ultimately, the humans had to defend themselves, not only against the alien species, but also from the looming threat of the Zereth fleet, still hunting them relentlessly. As weapons were readied, humanity's desperation fueled its resolve. It would not be exiled forever. The struggle for survival would forge the new beginning they so desperately needed. This continuation introduces the first major obstacle humanity faces in their exodus: an inhospitable world with hostile native species. It sets up a tense scenario where the survivors must make critical decisions about their future, all while continuing to flee from the Zereth's pursuit. You said. The confrontation with the native species on the habitable planet was brutal and swift. Despite their best efforts, humanity had no choice but to defend their fleet and territory. The natives, an alien race known as the Vector, were an aggressive, militaristic people used to protecting their world at all costs. Their initial strikes against the humans were vicious, and despite being technologically inferior, they fought fiercely, pushing the human fleet to its limits. However, humanity's greatest strength had always been its adaptability. After months of retreat and evasion, the exiled humans now found themselves in a situation that required them to fight not just for survival, but for a future. The humans began to use their ingenuity to turn the tide, repurposing old weapons, developing new defense systems, and, most importantly, uniting their people under a single banner. No longer was there division over resources or leadership. The time for petty squabbles had passed. A new, united force emerged: the Human Alliance. The leaders of the human colonies, many of whom had been scattered across different factions after Earth's fall, came together in a desperate council. They recognized that they needed to pool their resources, knowledge, and manpower to survive. If they were to succeed, they would need to work as one. And they would need to learn to fight smarter, not just harder. As they formed the core of the alliance, they also agreed on a singular goal: survival, unity, and above all, vengeance. The Zereth were still out there, and they would stop at nothing to ensure humanity's extinction. In the early days of the alliance, it was more a coalition than an army. Diplomatic missions were launched to seek allies among other species who might sympathize with their plight. While some races were hostile or uninterested in helping, a surprising number of alien factions responded to humanity's plea. They saw the human spirit as something remarkable. Despite their exile and losses, humanity continued to fight with unmatched courage. Slowly, the alliance grew, its influence expanding into neighboring star systems. The human military, once fragmented and disorganized, now had a singular focus: defense and offense. New ships were constructed, using salvage technology and human ingenuity. What they lacked in numbers, they made up for in creativity. Old Earth weaponry was retrofitted with alien tech. Human engineers designed devastating new weapons that made the Alliance's fleet a force to be reckoned with. Even the Vector, having underestimated humanity's tenacity, found themselves in retreat as the humans took back their stolen land and established a base on the planet. In the midst of this newfound strength, a significant event occurred. The first major victory of the Alliance came at the Battle of Vecra 7, a key system that had been under the control of the Zereth for years. The humans launched a surprise attack on the Zereth's supply lines, crippling their operations in the region. For the first time since the fall of Earth, humanity dealt a blow to their oppressors. It wasn't a decisive victory, but it was a symbol, a message to the galaxy that humanity would not be crushed. The Zereth were slow to react at first, but soon their leaders recognized the growing threat that humanity posed. It was not just about military power. Humanity's ability to inspire other races, to forge alliances where none existed, was beginning to change the balance of power in the galaxy. The human alliance was no longer a fragmented group of exiles. They were becoming something more. The survival of humanity had transformed from a mere hope to a certainty. The alliance had not only proven they could endure, but they were beginning to gain ground. And for the first time since their exile, humanity saw a future not defined by loss, but by strength, unity, and the unyielding desire to reclaim their place among the stars. The first taste of victory was intoxicating. The Battle of Vecra 7, though a minor skirmish in the grand scope of the galaxy, ignited a fire within the hearts of the human survivors. It was a spark, and like fire, it quickly spread. Across the scattered colonies of the human alliance, morale soared. For the first time since their exile, humanity believed they could reclaim their destiny. No longer were they just a scattered band of refugees. They were a united force, capable of standing toe-to-toe with the most powerful empires in the galaxy. The battle had also revealed something more: humanity's ability to adapt, to innovate, and to overcome. It was this indomitable will that began to define them. Engineers and scientists, working tirelessly in the shipyards and laboratories of the fleet, began to develop new technologies at an unprecedented pace. What was once seen as a fledgling power began to transform into a formidable military force. Human ships, retrofitted with salvaged alien technology, became more than a match for the invaders. New weapons, developed using a combination of human ingenuity and alien insights, were crafted. The most significant breakthrough came in the form of a new type of propulsion system, one that could propel ships faster than ever before, allowing humanity to cross vast distances in mere hours. This technology would allow the Alliance to go on the offensive, rather than always being on the run. The humans were no longer limited to their small corner of space. With this advancement, they could strike anywhere. As human forces grew stronger, their reputation spread. They became known not only for their resilience, but for their creativity. Humans could think on their feet, adapt to any situation, and outmaneuver foes who had centuries of experience. Even the Vector, who had initially underestimated them, began to recognize their potential. Though they had suffered losses in their conflict with humanity, the Vector were not a race to be trifled with, and their grudging respect for humans began to shape the galaxy's power dynamics. But the true test of humanity's rise came when they encountered the Eterans, an ancient and isolationist race known for their advanced technology and ruthless strategies. The Eterans had little interest in assisting the humans. They were focused on their own agendas. But when the Zereth began to push into Aeterran space, the Aeterrans had no choice but to respond. Humanity's reputation as fierce and cunning warriors quickly spread throughout the galaxy, and it was this reputation that caught the attention of the Aeterran Council. A rare diplomatic meeting was arranged, and for the first time in their exile, humanity stood at the table as equals with an advanced galactic power. It was a tense meeting, filled with suspicion on both sides. The humans were cautious, knowing that every word they spoke could determine their survival. The Aeterrans, on the other hand, were calculating, sizing up the humans as potential allies or threats. The negotiations were long and fraught, but in the end, the Aeterran Council agreed to a pact, a strategic alliance. They offered their technological expertise in exchange for military assistance in the war against the Zereth. Humanity, ever pragmatic, accepted the terms, and the alliance grew stronger still. With the Aeterran alliance secured, humanity's offensive against the Zereth intensified. The tide of the war began to shift. No longer were the human ships outmatched by the Zereth's advanced weaponry. The alliance's fleet was now equipped with Aeterran technology, including energy shields, faster-than-light weapons, and enhanced fleet command systems. The battle for survival had transformed into a battle for supremacy. Humanity's presence in the galaxy was no longer a whisper, but a roar. As the Zereth realized the true strength of the human-led alliance, their reaction was swift and brutal. They escalated their attacks, striking at vulnerable human colonies. But every move they made only united humanity more. The destruction of a key human outpost in the Chloris system became a rallying cry for the entire alliance. Revenge burned in the hearts of every soldier, engineer, and leader. The Zereth were not just a threat to humanity. They were an existential enemy, one that could never be allowed to succeed. The spark that had ignited the human alliance now burned bright. Humanity had become more than just survivors. They were warriors, innovators, and a force to be reckoned with. The war was far from over, but humanity's ascent had begun in earnest. The war with the Zereth had escalated. Humanity's victories were stacking up, but so were the stakes. Every win brought them closer to their goal, to reclaim their place in the galaxy. But as the human alliance grew stronger, so did the internal divisions. The unity that had once been forged in the fires of desperation began to crack under the pressure of war. It was at this critical juncture that the first whispers of betrayal began to surface. Some of the human colonies, isolated and struggling to maintain their own survival, began to question the direction of the alliance. They saw the constant need for war, the loss of countless lives, and wondered if the fight for vengeance was really the path forward. Others, especially those with economic and political power, feared that the unending war would leave humanity vulnerable to even worse enemies. The cracks widened when a well-respected leader from the outer colonies, Admiral Rourke, was suddenly and mysteriously recalled from the front lines. Rourke had once been one of the brightest minds in the human military and a key figure in the Alliance's rise. His strategic brilliance and leadership had been instrumental in the victory at Vecra 7, but his sudden disappearance raised suspicions. Soon after, news broke that Rourke had struck a secret deal with the Zereth. For years, he had been in contact with high-ranking members of the Zereth Command, negotiating behind closed doors. It turned out that Rourke believed that humanity would never truly defeat the Zereth. Instead of leading humanity into a future of endless war, he had made a deal to secure the survival of select human colonies, to be spared the Zereth's wrath in exchange for cooperation. His betrayal went deeper than mere negotiation. He had been feeding the Zereth critical information about the Alliance's movements, military strategies, and supply lines. The news of Rourke's treason sent shockwaves through the human fleet. Trust, which had taken years to build, was shattered in an instant. The Alliance was now fractured. Some people saw Rourke as a traitor, while others believed his actions were a calculated move to ensure humanity's survival in a galaxy that seemed bent on their extinction. As the betrayal unfolded, a deeper conspiracy was uncovered. A faction of powerful individuals within the Alliance, businessmen, military officers, and even some politicians had been quietly working with Rourke. They, too, had lost faith in the war effort and believed that the only way forward was to placate the Zereth. They didn't want victory. They wanted peace, no matter the cost. The rogue faction, now emboldened, began making moves of their own. The first target was the human capital ship Arcadia, which housed key military leaders and diplomats. A covert sabotage operation crippled its command center, making it vulnerable to a Zereth attack. It was only through the heroic efforts of a small group of loyal officers that the ship was saved. But the message was clear. The Alliance was no longer united. In the wake of Rourke's betrayal, the human fleet faced a difficult decision. The majority of the Alliance demanded swift justice, calling for Rourke's capture and the eradication of the rogue faction. But there were also those who saw the situation as a sign of just how deep the fractures had become. If the Alliance didn't heal soon, it could destroy itself from within. And that was a fate far worse than any alien threat. The battle lines were now drawn. Humanity had fought for so long to survive in the galaxy, but now they had to fight against each other. What remained of their unity was hanging by a thread. As the rogue faction made its final move, attempting to seize control of a key fleet, the survivors were faced with an even more difficult choice: hold on to their ideals of unity, or take drastic action to ensure that their survival and their revenge against the Zereth was secure. In this moment of crisis, the future of the human alliance was uncertain. Betrayal had torn apart everything they had worked for, but there was still hope. Humanity had fought against the galaxy's odds before. If they could stand united once more, they might still be able to defeat the Zereth. But first, they had to defeat the traitors in their midst. In the aftermath of Admiral Rourke's betrayal, the human alliance was plunged into chaos. The military faction that remained loyal to the core values of the Alliance took immediate action, organizing a counteroffensive against the rogue faction that had conspired with the Zereth. The internal war was swift and brutal. Brothers in arms turned against each other, old allies now clashing in battles that seemed no less vicious than the ones fought against the Zereth. Humanity's first priority became the capture of Rourke and his supporters, but the deep divisions within the fleet made that mission difficult. Some commanders and high-ranking officials, unable to reconcile with the idea of a betrayal within their own ranks, hesitated to strike decisively against their former colleagues. They were torn between loyalty to the Alliance and the undeniable truth of the betrayal. The longer they hesitated, the more ground the rogue faction gained, particularly in the outer colonies where their supporters had deep roots. A brutal series of skirmishes across multiple star systems weakened the Alliance's unity even further. Though the Loyalist forces maintained the majority of the fleet's firepower, the rogue faction had its own advantages. They had insider knowledge of Alliance strategy and resources, and they controlled a number of key military assets. For the first time in years, the future of humanity's fight for survival seemed uncertain. Meanwhile, in the shadow of this internal strife, the Zereth took advantage of the situation. Their fleets, once stalled by the strength of the Alliance's unified resistance, began probing deeper into human space. The rogue faction's secretive dealings had left the Alliance vulnerable. The Zereth saw the division as an opportunity, and they began a series of tactical raids, hitting key supply lines, colonies, and strategic bases. The exiled humans were once again on the back foot, forced to deal with an external enemy, while the war within threatened to tear their civilization apart. But the true test of humanity's survival was not just military, it was moral. The leaders of the loyalist factions began to question their actions. Could they justify the destruction of their own people for the sake of vengeance against Rourke and his faction? Could they afford to fight a civil war while the Zereth closed in on the final remnants of human space? The ideals of unity, justice, and survival were now in jeopardy. Each faction had its own vision of humanity's future, but they all clashed in what seemed like an inevitable collapse of everything they had fought for. In the midst of this internal chaos, a new leader emerged. Commander Lena Vasquez, a brilliant strategist and former high-ranking officer in the human fleet, had been working to heal the fractures within the Alliance. She had long been skeptical of the blind vengeance that some factions pursued and had argued for unity over division from the start. Vasquez, seeing the destruction caused by the Civil War, began a series of covert negotiations with both the rogue faction and the Loyalists. It wasn't an easy task. Emotions were running high, and each faction had its own demands. But Vasquez, with her charisma and tactical genius, was able to broker a fragile ceasefire. She reminded the fractured human forces of their original purpose: survival, not self-destruction. The war against the Zereth was still their true enemy, and while Orcs' betrayal was a betrayal of the highest order, humanity's survival depended on them standing together, not divided. The ceasefire held just long enough for Vasquez to broker a formal peace agreement, though the scars of the war within would never fully heal. The rogue faction would be allowed to stand trial for their actions, but they would be allowed to remain a part of the Alliance under new leadership. Unity had been achieved, but it was a fragile one. In the aftermath, Vasquez was appointed as the new leader of the Human Alliance, and under her command, the focus shifted back to the Zereth. The internal war had taken a toll, but humanity had learned a vital lesson. They could not afford to fight amongst themselves if they were to survive the greater threat. The Human Alliance, though weakened, was now more determined than ever to finish the fight they had started, to not only reclaim their place among the stars, but to ensure that the Zereth would never again threaten their existence. The ceasefire had been fragile, but it had worked, for now. The factions of the Human Alliance, though divided, had reluctantly agreed to unite under Commander Lena Vasquez's leadership. The war within had left scars that would never fully heal, but for the first time in a long while, humanity had a singular purpose again: to defeat the Zereth once and for all. The stakes were higher than ever. The Zereth, though weakened by the growing strength of the Alliance, had not been idle during the internal strife. They had retaken key systems, and their fleet had only grown larger, more formidable. The Alliance had lost precious time and resources during the Civil War, and now they were facing a formidable enemy on multiple fronts. If humanity didn't act quickly, the Zereth would consume the last of their homeworlds and leave them scattered in the void once more. Under Commander Vasquez, a plan was set in motion, one that was as bold as it was risky. Intelligence had uncovered a significant weakness in the Zereth military structure. Their central command network, located on the heavily fortified world of Zathar Prime, which served as the nerve center for their entire war effort. If the Alliance could destroy Zathar Prime's command hub, it would cripple the Zereth's ability to coordinate their forces. Without central command, the Zereth would be forced into chaos, opening the door for a final decisive push to reclaim human space. The mission was perilous. Zathar Prime was located deep within Zereth-controlled territory, and it was surrounded by layers of defenses. Only the most daring, most skilled operatives could hope to infiltrate such a stronghold. The Alliance had no illusions about the odds. They would need to strike hard and fast, and they would need to do it without alerting the Zereth to their movements. A special operations team, codenamed Phoenix Squad, was assembled. This elite group, comprised of the finest soldiers, engineers, and tacticians, was tasked with infiltrating the planet's heavily guarded atmosphere, disabling its planetary shields, and planting the explosives necessary to destroy the central command hub. Phoenix Squad's leader, Lieutenant Kyra Draven, was a veteran of the early battles in the war and had proven herself time and time again. But this mission would be unlike any they had faced before. Failure would mean the end of the Alliance and the total annihilation of humanity's chances to reclaim the stars. As Phoenix Squad prepared for their departure, the rest of the Alliance forces began assembling their own fleets for a simultaneous strike. While Phoenix Squad worked on the ground, the rest of the fleet would engage the Zereth forces in a full-scale diversionary assault. The hope was that the Zereth would be so focused on the fleet's attack that they would not realize the true purpose of the strike, the destruction of their central command. It was a risky strategy, but the only one that gave humanity a fighting chance. In the final briefing before their departure, Commander Vasquez addressed the assembled forces. Her voice was steady, but the weight of the moment was clear. This mission is humanity's final gambit. It's the last shot we have at survival. If we succeed, we will cripple the Zerath's ability to wage war, and we will secure a future for humanity. But if we fail, we will be scattered across the stars, hunted like animals. There is no turning back. The tension in the room was palpable. These soldiers, these engineers, knew the stakes. Each one of them carried the hopes of billions on their shoulders, and they knew that the fate of their species rested on the outcome of this mission. The fleets launched first, the massive warships and starcruisers cutting through the darkness of space as they headed for Zerath-controlled space. The diversionary assault was underway. As the Alliance fleet engaged the Zerath in a series of devastating space battles, Phoenix Squad made their move, slipping past the defenses of Zathar Prime. For humanity, the final gambit had begun. The battle for Zathar Prime was chaos incarnate. As the Alliance's fleet tore through the Zerath's defensive lines, a devastating series of explosions lit up the dark void of space. The Zerath were known for their disciplined, unyielding strategies, but even they could not withstand the sheer ferocity of the Alliance's assault. The humans had learned from their past failures and adapted in ways their enemies had never expected. The diversionary attack was a success. The Zerath command fleet was drawn into a trap, leaving the ground defenses on Zathar Prime vulnerable. But none of this mattered if Phoenix Squad could not complete their mission. The small elite team, flying through the crumbling atmosphere of Zathar Prime, was humanity's last hope. Lieutenant Kara Draven's heart raced as her team's shuttle approached the planet's surface. Every moment was filled with tension. The mission was clear: penetrate the planetary shields, disable the Zerath's primary defense systems, and plant the explosives in the heart of their central command. But the planet was heavily fortified. Nothing was going to be easy. With a crash, the shuttle hit the surface of Zathar Prime, deep within enemy territory. The team disembarked quickly, weapons drawn, ready to face the horrors that awaited them. Their path to the central command hub would take them through miles of heavily protected zones, filled with Zerath soldiers, automated turrets and traps designed to eliminate any intruders. The entire planet had been turned into a fortress. Despite the peril, Phoenix Squad moved with precision. The team's heavy-duty armor, combined with human ingenuity and technology, allowed them to survive against the onslaught of enemy defenses. They fought their way through countless battles, close-quarters combat, firefights with the relentless Zerath, and even moments where they barely evaded catastrophic traps. The team's cohesion was everything. Trust in one another was their most powerful weapon. As they neared the central command, the situation grew increasingly dire. The Zerath were aware of the Alliance's strike and had begun to mobilize reinforcements. Phoenix Squad could feel the weight of time pressing down on them. Every second spent on the planet was a second that the Alliance fleet was under assault. They needed to succeed, or all would be lost. Finally, they'd reached the heart of the Zerath's command complex, a towering structure of alien technology that pulsed with energy. The team breached the building, but the moment they entered, the Zerath activated their final defense. A massive shield that locked down the central hub and began charging its weapons. The countdown to detonation on the explosives had already begun, but if they couldn't disable the shield, the mission would fail. In a last-ditch effort, Draven and her team worked furiously. The shield's energy field was nearly impenetrable, but they found a weak spot. It was a desperate move, but Draven knew it was their only chance. The team sacrificed one of their own to breach the shield, a hero's sacrifice that would ensure the mission's success. With the shield disabled, the explosives were set. Phoenix Squad initiated the countdown, but as they made their retreat, the Zerath forces cornered them. There was no escape. It was a fight for their lives and for humanity's future. Back in space, the Alliance's fleet had taken heavy casualties. But as the final seconds ticked down, a flash of light erupted from Zathar Prime. The explosion was massive, a supernova of energy that obliterated the Zereth's command center in one devastating blow. The strategic collapse of the Zereth's operations was instant. Their forces, without coordination, began to disintegrate. The war was over. In the aftermath, the surviving members of Phoenix Squad, though few, stood victorious. They had completed the impossible. Humanity had reclaimed the stars. The Zereth's dominance was shattered, and the exiled humans now stood as the undisputed power in the galaxy. Their struggle was not just for survival, but for the hope that their legacy would live on, stronger than ever before. The human alliance had won, but at great cost. The war had taken everything from them, but it had also given them something greater, the future. The stars were once again within reach, not as exiles, but as masters of their own fate. The victory was sweet, but the true work, rebuilding their civilization and ensuring that the mistakes of the past were never repeated, had only just begun.